Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 7th of August 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the UK Column News. And joining me back in the studio after a few weeks away, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We'll get straight on with it. It is only 85 days to go until Brexit, apparently, and the question on everybody's lips, Patrick, is will there be a general election? Could the new UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson call a snap general election? This is Euronews here, but this is all over the place at the moment. So they're saying, for example, speculation is swirling over whether the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson will pull off a shock by calling an early general election. Johnson's visit to all corners of the UK, his promises of infrastructure spending in traditionally Labour voting areas, and a new advisor that is an expert in campaigning have all helped to fuel the idea the country is heading to the polls. And then there's Brexit. Johnson has promised to take the UK out of the EU by the 31st of October, but this could prove harder with a dwindling parliamentary majority. Rumours have persisted about an early election, even though Johnson has ruled one out. His predecessor, Theresa May, said there would be no snap election, but then promptly called one. So nobody is believing Boris when he says that there isn't going to be an election. As we pointed out the last couple of days, he only has a majority of one. That includes the DUP at the moment, Patrick. And so the question is, will he call an early general election? Well, he has a number of options. And really what's going on here, as far as I can see, is he's playing a three-way game of chicken. He's playing a game of chicken with the European Commission over the question of the backstop. And basically what he seems to have said to them is that if they move the backstop from the divorce agreement, this is Theresa May's deal, into the future relationship, then otherwise Theresa May's deal could remain the same, and he could probably get it through Parliament. In that case, we could leave with the deal. But he seems to be taking the view, or at least publicly stating, that because the date of the 31st of October is written into the Withdrawal Act, that's then written into law, and then we therefore will be leaving no matter what Parliament says or does. And he's therefore suggesting that if Parliament were to call for a vote of no confidence, for example, which would trigger a general election, that still wouldn't change anything because the date is written into the withdrawal agreement. But we've got to remember there's a court case still going on at the moment with respect to the date of the 31st of March. There's, we were supposed to leave on, or 29th of March, whatever the date was, can't remember now off the top of my head. We were supposed to leave at that point. That date was in law at that point, and that date was changed, apparently, although, as I say, there's a court case going on at the moment over whether that was a legitimate thing to do. So he's playing this game of chicken with the Commission. He's also therefore playing a game of chicken with the House of Commons, because the House of Commons saying that they will under no circumstances deal or allow a no-deal Brexit to take place. But he still only has this parliamentary majority of one, and that's even assuming everybody in his own party were to vote for his position, which they're absolutely not going to do because there are still plenty of Remainers in the Tory party. So it's an interesting situation over the next few weeks. We think there's probably going to be a general election before the 31st of October. And therefore, we think that people should be preparing for that and getting ready to perhaps intervene in their local hustings on certain issues, not least defence, because an election gives people plenty of opportunity to get involved in politics.
That's very risky to actually put it up to the public for a vote, Mike. That's incredibly risky on the part of the Tories, especially this appointed Prime Minister. I think if that happens, Mike, you're going to see they have to ramp up the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn. Will they be able to revamp the anti-Semitic slur campaign? Because he's already been a Kremlin agent. He's an IRA terrorist bomber sympathizer. He's an ISIS sympathizer. He's a rampant anti-Semite. What's left? What could they possibly smear Jeremy Corbyn with? Is there any other nefarious body around the globe that he could have been in league with?
No, but they've then started more recently attacking his health and
Right.
suggesting that he's not well. But I mean, it has to be said, Patrick, that over the last couple of weeks since Boris became Prime Minister, I think Corbyn looking relatively glum. I think he is concerned about the momentum that Boris has built up. Now, whether Boris can keep that going or not is another question. Certainly, the Brexit Party have today announced their first tranche of candidates that they would put up should there be a general election. And they're going to announce further candidates. And I think what they're intending to do is to run against Tories with a view to getting seats. Now, what effect is that going to have? The risk would be that they would split the Leave vote and perhaps do Boris some harm. But really what they seem to be claiming that they want to do is to get some members of parliament so that they can therefore influence Boris in the times ahead. There's plenty of skepticism about that, but
we'll see.
We'll see. In the meantime, our old friend Neil Basu, who's the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Assistant Commissioner, is also weighing in on Brexit, and he's particularly concerned that we're leaving EU security mechanisms without, and the potential of a no deal. And he's saying that those systems, security systems and tools were developed in the EU for very good reason. They were very good. We had just signed up to biometric sharing. In a no deal, we'd lose all that. We'd have to renegotiate it. So he's very concerned about that, concerned about the fact that we would return to the days of Interpol alerts, reliance on Interpol alerts for intelligence matters, policing intelligence matters, and relying on the 1957 European Convention on Extradition, which takes years, apparently, to extradite people, as opposed to the 6 weeks that it takes under the European arrest warrant. So more of this type of rhetoric appearing from various sources. We've had the Bank of England and others really trying to increase the anti-no deal position in preparation for September and October. But in the meantime, global Britain continues to move ahead. Dominic Raab is in the US yesterday and today. Here he is with Mr. Pence. Unfortunately, perhaps for the Americans, Liz Truss there with them as well, because of course she's international trade minister. So they're there to try to
the most qualified people, of course,
absolutely,
from the UK are sitting around that table.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they're there to try and do this trade deal. What do you think are the prospects of a successful trade deal here?
I think the more tension you see between Brussels and Britain, I think the prospects for a trade deal between the United States and Britain is very high. And if you look at the normalization at the moment between the British pound and the dollar, they seem to be coming into line with each other more than ever before in the past. And of course, that's good news for bilateral trade, Mike. It makes things a lot easier for people on both sides of the Atlantic.
So what's the potential effect of the recent revelations with Kim Darroch and Christopher Steele and Britain's involvement in Russiagate? Is that going to have any effect on the potential to successfully negotiate a deal here?
It probably gives a little more leverage to the United States because they're kind of maybe angry, and you might be making more demands on the Johnson government in that respect because the U.S. or Trump has lost face. But then again, Britain could be also have a few issues with the U.S. But the U.S. always going to have more leverage in that trade deal because for Britain to get access, better access to U.S. markets and commitments on purchases and major trade deals like that, that's going to benefit Britain by order of magnitude. What the U.S. wants is access to the U.K. They want access to state assets. They want to be able to get in on the next wave of privatization, also mergers and acquisitions. So I'm sure the defense industry, what's left of it anyway in Britain, is a juicy morsel on that table. So yeah, the United States, think of them as a corporate raider wanting to come in and devour what's left of the British economy, and think of Britain as a trader desperately wanting to get into the biggest shopping mall in the world. That's kind of how that relationship looks.
Well, before going to see Mike Pence, Dominic Raab was visiting his Canadian sidekick there, and they were dealing with the usual subject. So last month, apparently, he said, Christia joined my predecessor, Jeremy Hunt, to co-host a conference on media freedom in London, and we're delighted to think about ways to strengthen it for a second round. and I'm sure we'll be talking about the detail of that. And he went on to say that Canada is a stalwart ally in our defence after the Russian nerve agent attack in Salisbury last year. We appreciated the solidarity and appreciate those moments when you stand shoulder to shoulder with us to defend our shared values. And of course, they highlighted the issue of journalists being imprisoned in China. And so it's the usual rhetoric there between Britain and Canada, pushing these policy items that, which basically has censorship at the end of it.
Sure.
Now let's get back to elections and the United States, Patrick.
Election meddling. Well, we've heard a lot about election meddling over the last couple of years. Apparently, it's the Russians doing it. But let's take a look at some election meddling, which happened last week. If you did watch the Democratic debates on television or on CNN or on the internet, you would have seen a massive spike in interest after the debates in one particular candidate. We'll show you who that is, and we'll show you the reaction of Silicon Valley. So who is meddling in this case? Well, there's a little Tweety bird up in the corner. He looks familiar, doesn't he? So we did a little search. I just did this. We initiated this at 21 Wire. We did a little search. We just put Tulsi Gabbard, Mike, into the search bar of Twitter right after the debates, and this is what's come up here. Former KKK leader David Duke endorses Hawaii Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. She will put America first, etc. So that is a bit misleading, Mike, but you'd think that's the breaking news. That's the latest news story, right?
Right.
About Tulsi Gabbard, okay? So this is the first thing that comes up in Twitter when you're doing a search for Tulsi Gabbard. So let's take a closer look at that. We took a little closer look at that. Very cheeky here. Look at the date in the corner there, Mike. August 4th, 2019. But it seems that this story that Twitter is pushing up to the top of the search for Gabbard is not from August. It's not. They've actually recycled an old story. This is a smear piece that was done by Newsweek back in when? February 5th. February 5th, 2019. So they're boosting the worst possible story you could find, as if nothing's happened in the Gabbard campaign since February. Of course, that's not true. But this is what Twitter is doing in terms of election meddling. Apparently, Tulsi Gabbard laid some pretty heavy punches on the DNC's favorite, Kamala Harris. And I think this is what is triggered this reaction by the Silicon Valley, who are absolutely all behind Kamala Harris as their favorite candidate. So this is Hillary 2.0, is Kamala Harris. Tulsi laid a few knockout punches on Kamala, and this is the revenge. Now, just to be absolutely sure, Mike, we did a public search. As you can see, this is not logged into Twitter, and this is what you get with Kamala Harris. Look here on the left-hand side. Harris, El Paso shooting was domestic terrorism. So that's her being strong, a prosecutor, front-running candidate. And look at how this juxtaposed with the search on Gabbard. KKK leader David Duke endorses Hawaii Democrat. So that's a public search. So look a little bit closer here. Then they finally changed it, Mike, after we crowdsourced evidence and got about 30 screenshots from different users on different devices. Twitter managed to get wind of what we were doing. Then they changed it. This is what they then boosted here. Russia backs 2020 candidate Tulsi Gabbard as Syria record comes under scrutiny, and so forth. Now, what is this? What article are they actually linking to here? Well, we had a look. And was this piece here on The Independent, Mike? Russia takes the side of 2020 candidate. Did Russia actually take the side of Tulsi Gabbard? Well, we're looking closer here, and this article is basically linking to and serializing a blog post by none other than Eliot Higgins from Bellingcat. And here is Eliot. He's very proud. I just wrote 4,000 words on Tulsi Gabbard. Reports on chemical weapons attack in Syria. Dear reader, it's really bad. So he's very proud of the fact that he managed to squeeze out a 4,000-word blog post on Bellingcat, basically smearing Tulsi Gabbard. So this is Eliot Higgins, the great political scientist over there at Bellingcat. So you can see the coordination here. Now think about this for a minute. Bellingcat, Elliot Higgins, is very much affiliated, aligned, and has past funding connections with the Atlantic Council, who is advising Facebook and Twitter on social media, the Atlantic Council. So what are the odds, Mike, that some of what we're seeing here is being engineered or in a back room by some of these not so honest actors? I don't think that's a big stretch. So there he is, Elliot Higgins, on a sofa somewhere between The Hague and Leicester, where he's from, I guess. So let's take a look here. Now this is interesting, right after the debates, just to show you that there's more going on here. Tulsi Gabbard was not visible on any of the US trending terms here. And this is Curry Dobson, did screenshots here to prove this right after the debates. But she was number 10 worldwide. So how's that possible? She's not trending in any US territories, but it's number 10 worldwide. So Twitter erased her from US trending lists. So there's some meddling going on there, election meddling. So before the debate, this is what we saw in terms of Google trends. You can see here, that'll be Joe Biden in the gold states, #1 searched candidate. Second place, Kamala Harris. You see a few red states there. That's Kamala. And you see a green, Cory Booker. And there's one, South Carolina and Iowa, you'll see blue, and Alaska and Hawaii. That's Tulsi Gabbard. That's before the debate, Mike, on Google Trends. Let's look at after the debate. After the debate, Google Trends, all 50 states. Gabbard, #1. And they say she's only polling at 1%.
Right.
How accurate do you think those polls are?
Not at all.
Not very accurate. So why is she getting a raw deal on Twitter but not on Google? Well, it might have something to do with this. There's a closer look at all 50 states. Tulsi Gabbard, after the debates, #1 trending. In other words, people on the internet, this is all they want to know about. How did Tulsi do? So it turns out that, well, Google's probably giving her a fair shake, Mike, because there's a lawsuit pending. She's suing Google for $50 million for gaming searches and suppressing information using...
She needs to be doing that to Twitter as well then.
Well, yeah, and we suggested that much this week with Tulsi. So that's just to go to show you that in terms of election meddling, we've been told constantly over the last 3 years, Russia's meddling in the elections, etc. And I've just shown you proof that there's absolute meddling going on even this early before the primaries of the Democratic race, and it ain't Russia. It's the Silicon Valley. And they're cannibalizing the Democratic Party because they're absolutely frightened that there'll be an insurgent candidate, exactly what they did to Bernie Sanders last election in 2016. They'll do to Bernie again in 2020, but they'll also do to Tulsi Gabbard and anybody else that challenges the frontrunners.
And if they're doing this with elections, you got to assume they're doing this with other news as well.
Just basic organic searches for articles or any content on 21st Century Wire or UK Column or any alternative news outlets that are kind of in the sin bin, as it were, from whatever the political orthodoxy is at the moment. So they absolutely have the power to do this, and I've just shown you their proof that they're doing it.
Okay, well, if you like what we're doing at the UK Column, and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where you can find some options for doing that. And just like to remind everybody that we are taking a summer break this year, and so there'll be no UK Column news from the 12th until the 27th of August, and we'll be back in the last week of August on Wednesday for the news programme then. Well, contrary to rumour, we still aren't prepared to say who owns the blue bucket.
I'm a bit worried about the tire tracks around it, actually. Kids, watch out for cars on the beach.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, a quick reminder that Alternative View Tape 10.1 taking place in Kensington at Holiday Inn on the 27th of October. Details at alternativeview.co.uk. Now, I want to highlight this article in the Times here, Patrick. The headline is "Tanker Crisis, Russia and Iran to Face Western Navies in Gulf." And what are they saying? This is apparently this takes two journalists to write. This is Hannah Lucinda Smith and Catherine Phillip have written this together. And they're saying that Russia and Iran are to hold joint naval exercises around the Strait of Hormuz, raising the risk of a dangerous confrontation with Western forces in the Gulf. They have pledged to stage the war games by the end of the year, even as Britain and the United States step up their military presence in Gulf waters with a new joint task force to protect commercial shipping. The announcement marks a milestone in improving relations between Tehran and Moscow, former rivals who have found common ground in Syria's civil war, where both are supporting the Assad regime. So what do you take out of that?
I'm not sure.
Well, you take the fact that the suggestion is that Britain and the United States are policing the Straits of Hormuz, and in response to that, into the events of the recent tanker scandal, in response to that, Iran and Russia have decided to hold war games.
As a provocation against the British and the Americans who are doing God's work there in the Persian Gulf.
Indeed, this seems to be the implication from the Times. So let's see what other people are saying. Well, here is UA Wire. Russia and Iran prepare for a joint military exercise in the Strait of Hormuz. And they're saying Russia and Iran are getting ready for joint military exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's key oil arteries, through which tankers from Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait, carry 20 million barrels of oil each day. Within the next few months, Iran and Russia will hold joint naval exercises in the Strait. Iranian Navy Commander Rear Admiral Hussein Khanzadi told IRNA on Monday. The problem is, Patrick, that this, if you look at the date, was April the 30th, 2019. Yeah. So this predates the tanker business.
3 months ago.
Okay. This was announced earlier this year. It has been planned for months. So going back to the Times article.
But that can't be true, Mike, because the Times says that the Russians and the Iranians just decided to do that now just to smite Britain and America.
Well, that certainly seems to be what they're saying.
And they would never lie, would they?
I'm sorry, I'm calling this fake news.
But that's a mainstream article, Mike. You should always believe the mainstream first. All that other stuff you're showing me, it's not reliable. It's Russian. It could be Kremlin propaganda. You have to trust the Times. That's Rupert Murdoch's Times. They would never lie and try to deceive the public.
Well, I'm afraid I'm accusing them of doing exactly that. And not just them, either the RAF as well. And undoubtedly this has been taken up by mainstream media as well. The question is there a Russian invasion taking place? Well, apparently RAF Typhoon jets have intercepted Russian military aircraft in the last 2 days, 4 after launching on Monday and another yesterday is what they're saying. And they produced some nice photographs of them. So yesterday the Typhoons intercepted a Russian Tupolev Tu-134 Krusty transport aircraft.
So that looks dangerous.
Yes, flying close to Estonian airspace.
That one looks really dangerous. Look at all the bombs attached to it.
Yes, because it's totally abnormal for the Russians to be flying anywhere near Estonia, isn't it?
Frightening, that plane. Look at that thing.
Yes, and they also, the Typhoons, by the way, they're operating from Amari Air Base in Estonia in support of NATO's Baltic Air Policing mission. So that was...
that could be one of Jeffrey Epstein's Russian jets. What do you think? It's about the right size for...
It's always possible.
It's about a 20-seater.
But that's not all. It gets better because on Monday... they intercepted an Antonov AN-26 Kurl transport aircraft, and on the same day, same mission, they intercepted these two Russian Tu-142 Bear bombers.
Were they flying in international airspace?
Yes.
So they got intercepted in international airspace.
Of course.
Wow, what a...
Sorry, that picture now is two Su-27Bs.
What a tremendous accomplishment to intercept Russian planes in international airspace.
Close to Russia.
They're really keeping busy, aren't they, up there in the Baltic?
Absolutely. But nonetheless,
I'm sure those SUs there are frightened, aren't they? I mean, you can just see they're shaking in their boots, about to do their vertical thruster, engage their vertical thrusters, and do a little dance in front of the Typhoons. What do you think?
No question. What we're talking about here is the news, the way that this is being reported. the levels of propaganda that we're seeing are off the scale, off the
Remember a
charts.
couple of years ago, all the intercepts of the Russian planes, the subs, threatening to cut the internet cables in Britain. It's just kind of like
Just continues.
recycling all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great.
But in the meantime, if it's bad enough that mainstream media, the traditional mainstream media are involved with this type of propaganda, well, let's not worry, because Facebook's riding to the rescue. They're investing, they announced this a couple of months ago, they're investing £4.5 million in local news. Now, of course, this comes out of the Cairncross review, where Dame Frances Cairncross said that there needed to be much more focus on local journalism. And of course, over the last couple of years, we've had the BBC funding similar programs. But as I say, at the end of last year, Facebook announced the Community News Project, £4.5 million project, designed to support local journalism in the UK. 82 regional journalists was what they were looking for. Over 4,000 people applied for this project. So that perhaps says something about the state of journalism in this country, Patrick. But the first 33 community reporters have been in London yesterday to be trained in news gathering and in storytelling and the use of things like Facebook Live and so on. So that's all very exciting for them. Now, I wonder who's running this project. If we look there, his name is not actually mentioned, but the guy who's in charge of this is Nick Wren. He's head of news partnerships, EMEA, at Facebook. And imagine what background he has. Well, of course, the BBC, Reuters, and CNN. So I don't think we're going to see anything new in terms of the quality of journalism from Facebook here, because they are basically have given this over to somebody with that type of background to run the project. But if you want to learn to be a journalist, you can head over to Facebook Blueprint here. Learn with Facebook Blueprint. You can learn all kinds of things. Stories School, tips and tricks for organic stories. Journalism safety. Well, there's a whole section on journalism safety there. Many journalists have concerns about how they can keep themselves and their information safe. This course shows you how to keep your account secure and so on. So it is
half of those videos you just showed me, Mike, were how to integrate Facebook tools into your work.
right.
So it's a little bit of a corporate motivation.
It's in no
here.
way self-serving.
Of course not.
But anyway, the propaganda situation just...
There's a lot of exciting stories I think this sort of approach is going to produce, Mike. Just tons of excitement. The stuff that people are just dying to read. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely
It's
right.
like your local lemonade sale. How do you make that sexy? These are the sort of things you'll learn if you get involved with Facebook's local news initiative. Go Nick Clegg.
Absolutely. Now, let's move back to the other side of the Atlantic, Patrick, and the El Paso shooting.
Yes. Now, onto this matter. If you didn't notice, there were two, at least as far as I could count, two mass shootings this past weekend in America. And, well, very quickly, these were framed in a political way. The first one was the El Paso shooter. Apparently shot up a Walmart, drove 9 hours from Dallas to shoot up a Walmart. Lots of Hispanic people shot and wounded as well, so it's a predominantly Hispanic area in El Paso. And so immediately this was branded as a right-wing mass shooting. Because as if by magic, the shooter had posted a very detailed manifesto up online. He's alive, by the way. He surrendered himself to custody. Exactly the opposite of what he said he was going to do on his manifesto, by the way. But if you read the manifesto, it is very detailed, very nuanced. I'll just give you one excerpt here. It says, "They come here as economic migrants, not for asylum reasons. This is an encouraging sign that the Hispanic population is willing to return to their home countries if given the right incentive, like shooting up a Walmart, an incentive that myself and many other patriotic Americans will provide." And he goes on to talk about a number of other issues, Mike. He talks about corporate America taking over the country, and that corporations want immigration because they want cheap labor. These are all mainstream talking points, basically, but they're sort of littered throughout this so-called manifesto. And he also talked about the need to protect the environment and so forth. So, you know, left-wing themes as well, baked into this as well. Did he write this manifesto? As far as we're told so far, yes, maybe. But, you know, who can absolutely be sure who's done what? But the main thing is that this is being used to sort of rev up the left wing in the country. This is the El Paso shooting has absolutely injected a massive amount of energy into the Democratic campaign, and a few candidates have benefited from this. Most notably, the congressman from El Paso. His name is Beto O'Rourke. I think we have a
little clip here, yes, and well.
Is there anything in your mind that the president can do now to make this any better?
What do you think? You know that he's been saying. He's been calling Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. I don't know, like members of the press. What the? Hold on a second. You know, it's these questions that you know the answers to. I mean, connect the dots about what he's been doing in this country. He's not tolerating racism. He is promoting racism. He's not tolerating violence. He's inciting racism and violence in this country. So, you know, I don't know what kind of question that is.
So that clip is all over social media and on a whole host of different websites and social media accounts. Is this the normal behavior of Beto O'Rourke?
He hasn't weighed in on this particular subject to this level of passion, but he's basically blaming Donald Trump for the El Paso shooting, saying that it's been Trump's racism and so forth. Obviously, this is a national conversation, the whole border security issue. It's been going on, I don't know, for probably pretty intensely for the last 12 years in America. So it didn't just pop up with Donald Trump, but it's become very much politicized, as everything has, during the Trump presidency over the last couple of years. So Beto is blaming Trump for this. This has revved up the left, but it's also created a equally polarizing opposite reaction and defensive reaction on the right. And we'll show you a few things in a minute.
Well, just before we do that, I wanted to ask you this, because one of the other video clips that I saw of him having a similar type of rant, he said, well, Donald Trump has said that he's coming to El Paso. He needs to be treated with respect. But he was basically, he was then qualifying that by saying, you know, Trump is insightful and something might happen
he
to him.
deserves to have a safe visit or something? Or,
exactly that.
Yeah,
yes.
He deserves to be safe
right.
when he comes to El Paso. So Beto's saying, my hometown, El Paso, Trump should be treated and kept safe.
So there was almost a sort of guarded threat in that.
That's a veiled threat.
A veiled threat.
That's a veiled threat to Beto's base. So he is dog whistling to the radical left wing that would like to sort of the Antifa of the world, if you will, that would like to sort of, you know, show Donald Trump you're not welcome in El Paso, and maybe some violence or violent protests or something like this when the president comes. So that's O'Rourke, who's like running for president. You saw that clip, Mike. I mean, he's just completely out of control. Mm-hmm. This is a kind of an act. He's very theatrical. He sees this as his time. So he wants to capitalize on this and get as much bounce in the polls as possible. He'll tell you, no, I just care about the people. But that's not the behavior. What I'm seeing from this candidate, Mike, is not an altruistic motives at all. Mm-hmm. This is somebody who's trying to capitalize on division. And this isn't just happening on that side of the spectrum. We'll show you it's happening on the other side as well.
So left wing then? So
another shooting on the same day, just hours after El Paso, the Dayton shooter. Apparently, this is a report from CNN, and let's look at a little bit closer about what this report says. Now, everything's based on your social media footprint these days, Mike. So Twitter account appears to be left-wing, extreme left-wing, anti-police, tweets supporting Antifa, anti-fascists, et cetera, and supporting messages for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So the right-wing press has seized upon this and saying this is a left-wing mass shooter. So, and he's been threatening right-wing personalities or interacting with accounts that have threatened right-wing personalities on social media and so forth. So this is revved up Trump space, basically saying, look, Antifa's violent, even though this person isn't Antifa per se, but he's, quote, interacting with Antifa accounts on Twitter. And so all we have to go by is the mainstream reporting on this and social media footprints. So we don't have a whole lot, actually, Mike. But you can see what's happening here. You can see both sides, the polarization and the sort of the escalation of rhetoric and threats.
But where's the traditional balance in taking a step back and looking at a situation from the mainstream media? The mainstream media is taking an active role in that revving up of opinion, and they're taking partisan positions themselves.
Yeah, and they're framing these. This is what's important. They're framing the events in a partisan way. Now, whether the shooters are partisan or not is actually neither here nor there, because for an objective journalist, the first thing is there was a crime committed. And that's a forensic crime scene. And you have to determine what happened. And you have to determine why. What is the real motive? But it seems like these days, journalists just need to go look at Twitter feeds or Facebook accounts, and it's very easy to create a narrative based on that. It's also very easy for other people to post things on other people's accounts, or even for other third-party actors to be involved in some of these messaging boards, pretending to be from one side or the other, and we actually found proof of this this week on 8chan, with FBI informants running amok on 8chan. Now, the El Paso shooter is said to have telegraphed his shooting on 8chan, just like previous mass shootings as well. I believe the Christchurch shooter, and also one of the synagogue shootings in America as well, was telegraphed on 8chan. So it's almost like a process, Mike. You telegraph the shooting on 8chan, then the event happens, and then there's a national outrage, then there's political framing, and then there's condemnation and calls for various legislation and regulation of social media, candlelight vigil within 24 hours, and then nobody talks about it after 72 hours. No one is talking about this right now in U.S. media. They've moved on to a whole other set of topics. So. But the only thing that's actually keeping it alive is probably Trump. So, left wing, right wing, same day. You think that's just a coincidence? I'm going to ask the question, is that just a coincidence? The same day, major left wing, major right wing mass shooting. Well, as we said before, FBI agents accidentally revealed their own 8chan posts attempting to redirect white supremacist rage away from the CIA or Mossad and to blame Russia. So they're trying to steer people into various conspiracy theory cul-de-sacs. This is the FBI caught red-handed here on 8chan, according to this report on the Current Events Inquiry. And we've linked through and checked some of these reports. They do look very credible, but I do encourage people to go and check them for themselves.
Of course, it's pretty hard to do that at the moment because 8chan's still down, as far as I know.
It is, but there's screenshots of a lot of these things, and this stuff has been documented by a number of people who've been following this closely. Now, it wouldn't be the first time that the FBI or informants or handlers have been involved in ginning people up on social media, trying to radicalize people or direct traffic. So this is a reality. Yes, it does happen. Yes, it's proven. There's a historical record of this sort of behavior by federal actors. Okay, so that said, Mike, it has to be considered, are there third-party actors? Are there state actors involved? Are there political actors involved in as incendiary variables in some of these situations that to help amplify or to increase the speed in which the events unfold? This has to be asked. And the mainstream media is not asking these questions, but there's just plenty of evidence, from the Garland shooting to federal FBI informants at Charlottesville, the big white supremacist rally. One of the top instigators on the white nationalist quote side was an FBI informant. So, and I'm sure on the Antifa left-wing side it's the same.
So I've been asking the question for quite a number of months now, Patrick. Is there, because again, this past week, we've been seeing stories from the British government and the media about the rise of the right wing in the UK, for example. Is there a rise in the right wing as an organic sort of thing, or is this in fact being created? And what you seem to be suggesting is the FBI are on 8chan effectively inciting people.
This is nothing new. The FBI has been doing this for decades, from the civil rights movement all the way forward. Every single movement, every single political movement has been at some point, at some level, infiltrated by informants, by handlers. There's plenty of evidence, and also Muslim extremists as well. The Garland, Texas, Draw Muhammad cartoon event that was just infested with federal agents and handlers and informants. So including one that was actually directing the shooter himself prior to the event, paid cash to do so. That's all documented. But let's just have a look. Same day. What else happened on the same day? And this is a question I'd like to put out there. On the same day this weekend, at least 42 people shot in Chicago. Mm-hmm. This did not make the national news. What I'm showing you here are local reports that are syndicated by CBS, which is a national broadcaster. So I'm showing you local reports. 42 people shot in Chicago. This did not make the news. This happens every week in Chicago. It happens every week in Baltimore. This weekend, 7 shootings. I think 7 people died. 4 people died just this past weekend in Baltimore. There was, I don't know how many dozens of people wounded in shootings. So this is just this past weekend. No outrage, no political brinksmanship. Why? You have to ask yourself why. Why do weekly carnage that takes place in Chicago, Baltimore, Seattle, Tacoma, why is this not newsworthy? Why is this not getting national headlines and being used to put pressure the president or the Democrats or et cetera? This is the question. No national media coverage for this. This is a weekly event. So this should make you suspicious. Why are they focusing on these high-profile mass shootings when this type of violence on the aggregate is happening every week in America? I'm very suspicious about these events on many levels, partly because of what I'm showing you right here. So, I mean, just do a quick Google search. Look at this. And this one just kind of caught my eye here in the middle, Mike. Baltimore reached its 200th homicide this year. That didn't make the news. I mean, it was a footnote in the Washington Post, but it didn't receive any of the coverage. And these watermarks are being hit every week around the United States. But because if it's black on black crime, the media is not interested. If it's a white middle class shooter, they're on it, and it's ratings gold. It's ratings gold, 48 hours nonstop. And so what's driving this? Well, this was just a week before the El Paso shooting, Mike. Steve Bannon holds a border wall, quote, symposium down in El Paso. Now, did that not trigger, or did that not, was that not sending a message out to the base, to the radical right, or to the radical left? You can see this is real. This is happening. This is going on. And look what's scheduled for September. Leftist groups plan 10-day resistance convergence at the border. And this is being marketed by the reactionary right here as a militants training tour. And it's not a militants training tour. So the right wing, this is Andy Ngo here, ginning this up as an Antifa militant training tour, and it's not, actually. So on the right, the left, and then various actors on social media, influencers I'll call them, who are amping it up to even a higher level, especially on the right-wing side. And what are they after here? They want civil war. Is this what they want? Because this is what it's being constructed as. This is what they're heading towards. So they're wanting to create some kind of a civil war sort of scenario. And this is also what we got this morning. The brother of presidential candidate Julian Castro releases the names and employers of dozens of Trump donors around the city of San Antonio. Releases them publicly for no reason whatsoever other than he's taking advantage of this polarized atmosphere in the wake of a mass shooting very close to his city in San Antonio, Texas. And so think about this for a minute. Think about this. Going into the presidential election, what are the swing states? What states do the Democrats need to win to capture the nomination? They have to win Texas. So who would be an ideal vice presidential candidate to help swing the vote in Texas? Beto O'Rourke as a VP. And Ohio is a key swing state. So this weekend, El Paso, Dayton, Ohio. Who's the is there a Democratic candidate from Ohio available? I don't know. I think Tim Ryan dropped out this past week, but he might still be eligible as a vice presidential candidate. He could help carry Ohio for the Democrats. So again, the gun issue will be used as a major divisive issue. The immigration issue will be used as a major divisive issue. So the race war, the culture war, the polarization will be amped up. And this is happening right now and right in front of our eyes in America. It's amazing.
Okay, and well, let's end this section on that one.
Well, and this is what's lurking in the background. If you didn't notice, this was a couple weeks ago, was it, Mike? I think the story was released.
Yes.
Conspiracy theories. This is from The Guardian, mind you, but there's different versions of this story. But the FBI basically is equating the fueling of extremist violence with conspiracy theories online. So this isn't just right-wing conspiracy theories like QAnon. This is really listing pretty much anything that falls outside of the normal bounds of mainstream consensus reality discourse. So the FBI has now flagged that as a potential danger for domestic terrorism, as anybody who is talking about or putting out what they will deem as a conspiracy theory. So that's just consider that in relation to everything that we've shown you in the last couple of minutes, and you can.
I think we need to consider, how we react to what we're seeing in the mainstream press. If we're seeing rhetoric in the mainstream press, which is designed to generate a negative reaction in people, then we got to ask the question why that particular headline is there, and whether our reaction is appropriate.
It is, and I'll just also say the last thing is the FBI itself is responsible for promulgating one of the biggest conspiracy theories in U.S. history, which is that the Russians colluded with the Trump campaign to steal the 2016 election. Can you believe that? It's amazing.
Yes. Right, look, I just want to finish with this. Now, a couple of days ago, RUSI published this workshop report, as they describe it, RUSI FES, British-German Dialogue on Defence and Security. Now, this event took place in March, but, well, it's pretty clear from this report why it didn't get any coverage in the mainstream press, because it seems to have taken place under Chatham House rules. So nobody, no attribution. In fact, we're not allowed to know who actually attended it. So it took place on the 7th of March. This was a joint event between RUSI and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. It was a half-day workshop all about European defence with some, what they described as leading UK and German parliamentarians in attendance, alongside leading security and defence experts from both countries. So what was the main focus? Well, it was, of course, defence union. And of course, this is all about the relationship between Germany and Britain. And of course, bilateral cooperation is one of the key pillars of defence union. Now, who wrote this report? It was a guy called Jeremy Wimble, who's a project officer, senior project officer at RUSI within the International Security Studies team. So I'm just going to show a couple of quotes from this article here. So on March 7th, RUSI and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung brought together leading UK and German parliamentarians and leading security and defence experts from both countries to discuss the most salient threats to European security. The subject of a European army dominated much of the open discussion. With the goal of achieving strategic autonomy for Europe, European states should look to form a joint command structure that would allow the EU to deploy forces both within and beyond Europe's borders. Now, this, in one sentence, really highlights two of the key points that the UK column and David Ellis have been making about defence union and what it means. And that is single point command and control. The EU becomes in command of national militaries at an EU level at a single point. and the ability to deploy forces within the EU as well as beyond Europe's borders, as they describe it here. Now, can we imagine? We have already seen what French forces, police forces, are doing to the Yellow Vests in France. Can we imagine if they are showing little restraint? Can we imagine what restraint would be visible if Polish or Czech forces were brought into France, or German forces were brought into Greece, or British forces were brought into Poland? There's no local empathy with the people in the country. So people should see the dangers of this and recognize the dangers of this and understand that Britain is going to be involved in this. We'll come on to that in a second. It was strongly suggested that the US can no longer be regarded as a reliable partner and that Europe ought to take responsibility for its own defense mechanisms. Now, this is a view that was expressed a couple of years ago by Nick Whitney, who's former British Foreign Office, currently European Council on Foreign Relations, where he said at another RUSI event, in fact, that Europe needs to take responsibility for its own defense if Trump can't be impeached or if he can't be house-trained. That was the language that he used. So Trump has not been house-trained, and for that reason, they're now suggesting that that the US can no longer be regarded as a reliable partner. They went on to say, at present, European states do not believe that there's any democratic means to hold NATO accountable. So NATO is not considered democratically accountable. That's another reason they need to take defence into their own hands, because EU Defence Union would come under the bastion of democracy, the European Parliament, and the European Parliament would hold it accountable. You try not to laugh when I say that, but that seems to be their position. And they're saying post-Brexit, further discussion should be had to establish how non-EU states can be integrated, not take part as a third country, not take part on a case-by-case basis, how non-EU states can be integrated into PESCO-led projects. And of course, this being a British-German event, that can really only be a reference to the UK, should we actually leave on the 31st of October. So it's interesting that it took several months for RUSI to publish this report on that event. We aren't apparently allowed to know who attended that event. We don't know who the UK parliamentarians were, but certainly some UK parliamentarians fully understand, having been briefed at this event, the implications of defence union, and yet they still refuse to engage complete silence.
Well, the cat's out of the bag, at least, we can say.
Absolutely.
For sure, yep.
Right. Okay, well, we will have to leave it there because we're long past time. Thank you very much for joining us, Patrick. Just another quick reminder, Friday's programme will be the last for 2 weeks, but we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Friday with David Scott and Brian. See you then. Bye-bye.